The Skeleton Crew, or Wildfire Ned. Part 3. Author Anonymous. Chapter 21. The Wolf and the Lamb, a Scoundrel of the First Water. Unluckily for himself, it was an evil day when Charlie Warbeck first made the acquaintance of Philip Redgill. Philip, as all knew, was a great don about town, and maintained a handsome suite of rooms, to which the gayest of the gay resorted. His father was a very wealthy man, so all the world said, a great ship owner, and a merchant prince of the good city of London. To be patronized by the son of such a person poor Charlie considered a very fine thing. Wasn't Philip Redgill one of the sparks of fashion? Did not fair dames of doubtful virtue, perhaps, smile bewitchingly upon him? Was he not nodded to by this lord and that one? Could he not handle a sword with almost any man? Said Charlie and many others. And was it not a great thing, therefore, to be known to, and to be hand and glove with such a person when I am only a chief clerk in the India House, and not to depend upon but my own advancement and old Sir Richard's generosity? Yes, this was all true, but Charlie Warbeck little dreamed of what a cool, conscienceless villain Philip was, and how he gained the money he sported with so lavishly. About town, as it was called. It was true that Sir Richard Warbeck's signature had been forged to a valuable bill, but how it was done no one could tell. Suspicion had fallen upon Charlie, and in truth he did sign his uncle's name to the bill in question, but was unconscious of having done so, and was guiltless. This singular affair, the first link in Charlie's after misery, but not the first in Philip's chain of crimes by any means, occurred in this manner. After Charlie had been some time intimate, as they should be, Philip said, on the score of relationship, young Redgill gave a party at his lodgings, to which Charlie was invited. During the evening Philip wrote a note to Sir Richard Warbeck, and folded it in a neat wrapper, after the manner of those days when envelopes were unknown. "Here, Charlie," said he, "direct this for me." Charlie, who had been drugged by Philip, directed the note to Sir Richard Warbeck, and nothing more. "That will do," said Philip, and he took up the note in a careless manner, while Charlie dropped off to sleep. "That will do excellently. If old Sir Richard had written the direction himself it couldn't have been a better facsimile of his own handwriting, for there are not any two persons under the sun who write so much alike as the old knight and Charlie. Bravo! It was a clever trick of mine, an excellent thought, by Jove!" As he said this, chuckling, he took off the covering of the letter, which proved to be nothing else than a promissory note for £1,000. "All I wanted was this signature," said Philip in high glee. "How neatly I got it, too! I'll get it discounted among the Jews tomorrow. It can never be traced to me again." The bill was passed among the Jews, and Philip got the money. In time it became due, when the trick was discovered, and Sir Richard refused to pay. Officers had the case in hand. It came to Charlie's ears, and although Sir Richard never breathed a suspicion of what he thought, Captain Jack long suspected him, but could not obtain any positive proof to convict him, unless, as he often did, enter the witness box and complete his chain of evidence by deliberate false swearing. Though many persons laughed at the loss which the Jews suffered in the transaction, the final bill holder, a long-bearded English Israelite, Moss, by name, swore solemnly never to let the matter rest, nor did Captain Jack ever lose sight of Charles Warbeck, despite his respectable position and the powerful Sir Richard. The very next day after Captain Jack's visit to Philip's apartments, Charles Warbeck was sent out to collect various large sums on account of the India House, of which old Sir Richard was one of the managing directors. He was watched and dogged throughout the whole of the day by a spy employed by Philip, and the news was brought to him that Charles had then in his possession a large sum, which, as usual, he was to account for that same evening. But on his way back to the India House, Philip Redgill met him, and in a careless manner, said he was very short of cash, and begged of Charlie to loan him £50 until the end of the week, as he was going to a masked ball that night. Charlie had not any such sum, but promised to see what he could do by borrowing, and would see Philip that night. This was agreed to. But ere they parted, wine was called for, and the hours flew by rapidly. Quicker than he imagined the time passed at which he was expected at the India House, and after cursing his bad luck, he drank again and again with Redgill, until at last he became very much the worse for liquor, and had to be carried to his lodgings by two chairmen, yet all the while, and through all his drunkenness, taking great care of the bundle of notes, which he had secreted in his breast, next to his skin, for fear of theft or accident. It was now 9 o'clock at night, and the two chairmen, being paid, left the young man at his own door. With all his ingenuity he was unable to use his night key, and stood fumbling at the door a considerable time, and swearing not a little. Charles was in a fog. The keyhole seemed to be removed from its accustomed place, for he could not find it from the unsteady motion of his hand. The latchkey dropped many times, and it was doubtful how long he might have remained there, shivering in the cold, had not the oft apostrophized and obstinate key fallen into the area, and raised his anger to the highest pitch. "I'll bring someone down to the door," said he, and commenced knocking at it with great vigor and noise. In a few moments Dame Worthington, the good old gentlewoman his landlady, appeared at the door attired in undress, and could scarcely recognize her lodger ere that unsteady gentleman, who, swaying to and fro, but holding the area railings, stumbled into the passage and tumbled over the astonished housekeeper, who, gasping and groaning, could scarcely be extricated by a female servant, who, candle in hand, rushed to the rescue, and bore off her mistress to the back parlor bedroom. Charlie tumbled upstairs as noisily as a young elephant might be expected to do, knocking down the flowers and flower stand on the landing, the globe of goldfish on the windowsill, and raised the whole house by his laughter, swearing, and heavy tread. "Just to think of that young man serving me so!" said Dame Worthington, when sufficiently recovered from her state of collapse to articulate coherently. "Just to think of him who's been more than a mother, to knock over my flowers and the goldfish, to tumble over me in the passage and go to sleep lying in my room, without word of apology, in a state of senselessness, laughing with the lodgers on the stairs, and to go to bed with Mistress Haylark in a delicate state of health on the landing. Oh, Mary, Mary! That I should have lived to see him with my own eyes in bed in the parlor, laughing, making fun, and tumbling over me before you and Mistress Haylark's daughter, which is old enough to be his mother. Dearie me, Mary, my dear, dearie me! Such is the way, my dear, that the black bottle in the cupboard which lodgers marked poison operates at the dead of night upon a poor defenseless housekeeper and widow who's been quiet and kind to him in the passage, but not old enough or forgetful enough to disremember the young man in her night-clothes named Warbeck, who has lost her lawful consoler, which smells, on the top shelf behind the pickles, for 10 long years, like gin." It is difficult to imagine, perhaps, the dreadful state of feeling in which the garrulous dame found herself after the consolations of her lawful consoler which smells, on the top shelf behind the pickles, for 10 long years, like gin. But of this we are fully assured, that when Charles Warbeck had had a pleasant nap in his cozy room, and concluded a long consultation with the water pitcher, he discovered, unmistakably, that several hundred fairies, or demons rather, were busily engaged at wood, chopping under the canopy of his cranium, and threatening every moment to split his invaluable head into halves. Pale, penitent, and full of pious intentions for the future, Charlie Warbeck lay on the sofa before his fire, buried in thought. The church clock struck the hour of 11, and, as he heard it, he sighed. "What a fool I have been today in not taking that packet of notes to the India House. I shake like a leaf, and I know not why, and haunted by every imaginable terror. I cannot gaze firmly at anyone. The sound of every voice seems like a demon bawling in my ears, and every step that approaches appears to be that of some officer ready to tap me on the shoulder, and march me off to prison. I'd give anything in the world to have had this cursed money delivered today, and should not have dreamed of such a thing as to absent myself, but for Red Ill. He has continually bored me to lend him money and lend him money, until my own poverty almost tempted me to steal. D.N. the money," said Warbeck, in a rage, slamming the packet of notes upon the table, and tossing about in his chair. "It burns my very pocket, and my brain even seems on fire since I've had that wine." For some time young Warbeck sat looking at the notes, and would willingly have gone to the India House then, but it was too late. While thus reflecting, the door noiselessly opened, and Redgill entered the chamber. Approaching the table, he was much surprised at Charlie's absence of mind in not awaking from his reverie, but was pleased to see the bank package lying on the table. Pretending not to have observed anything of the sort, he slapped his friend familiarly on the back, who, awaking to his senses, seized the package in much haste and confusion, and placed it, as he supposed, unseen, beneath the cushions of the sofa. Redgill, cold as ice, perfectly collected, and fully resolved in purpose, observed his friend's perturbation and confusion, but smiled good-humoredly, and conversed with animation. "Any money on hand tonight, Charlie, my boy, eh? You promise, you know. I thought I'd call, and see if you had got the £50. Money!" said Charlie, with affected surprise, gazing with much earnestness at his friend smoking. "Money? No! How should I have any? I never have any, you know. I'm not like you fellows with rich daddies, who can give 'em a check occasionally. I wish I had, my boy, but I haven't got a penny. Sorry I disappointed you, Philip. I imagined I could borrow it for you, but couldn't." Conversation was continued between the friends, but on the part of young Warbeck with much difficulty, for his unnatural excitement almost choked utterance. During a pause in their conversation, a single knock was heard at his door. Full of wild imaginings, Charlie opened it, and old Sir Richard, one of the directors of the India House, walked across the room, and without ceremony took a seat on the sofa beside the fire, but without speaking a word. Pulling off his gloves very slowly and solemnly, he bowed to Philip, and said, with a frown, "Would you be kind enough, Philip, to allow me a few moments' private conversation with Charles, on very important business, indeed, I can assure you, very, on India House matters, Mr. Redgill, which admits of no delay." "Thank you." Finding he was out of place at that moment, Philip bowed in a hurried manner, looked for his handkerchief and gloves, which were thrown about the sofa pillows, and left the room with a flushed face. "Charles," at length Sir Richard began, looking the young man sternly in the face, "what am I to understand by your unaccountable conduct?" A solemn pause. "Good heavens!" mentally ejaculated Charlie. "I am discovered, disgraced, and punished, and all so soon!" Overcome with emotion, he hung his head in shame and perspired unnaturally at every pore. "What am I to think of you, sir? Is this the reward of all my labor, anxiety, money, and solicitude? Have I not educated you, taken you by the hand, and lifted you up step by step to what you are, eh? And do you now, when I expect to see all my labors rewarded, turn round upon me, and disgrace me? Spare me, Sir Richard! Spare me, for heaven's sake! My heart is bursting, and my brain is all on fire," said Charles mournfully, averting his head from the old man's gaze. "There are very few things which occur in the India House or out of it which do not quickly reach my ears, Charles. I only heard of it just now, sir, and must confess I felt shocked. Good Dame Worthington told me." "Dame Worthington?" said Charlie, astonished. "How could she have known it?" "Yes, Dame Worthington knew it. Why, of course she does, and every one in the house. Isn't it the talk of the whole neighborhood?" The young man's agony was painful, and his face became more haggard in a few moments from mental suffering than age could have affected during a course of years. "What do you think they will do with me, Sir Richard? I shall plead guilty, and save unnecessary trouble and expense." "Guilty? Yes, I think so, when so many were witness to it, and your sentence will be to reform, keep early hours, leave wine parties alone and gambling, and beg the old dame's pardon for swearing at her tonight." Had he been shot, Charlie could not have been more suddenly startled. Starting to his feet, and looking wildly about him, he comprehended all. Sir Richard knew nothing of his having the bills, and with a heavy sigh, which then escaped him, there was lifted an insupportable weight of doubt and pain from his soul, and he breathed more freely and rapidly as one who has been running fast, or carrying a heavy load. Infinitely relieved, the young man even attempted to smile at the unexpected and fortunate turn his imaginings had taken, and with as much self-command as he could bring to bear upon the conversation, laughed, and begged Sir Richard's pardon for his wild life of late, and inebriety that night, when the kind old dame was knocked over in the passage, and his own nose had come into violent contact with the stairs. When Sir Richard had departed, in good humour with the repentant youth, Charlie drew the sofa nearer to the fire, and began to congratulate himself upon escaping an anticipated suspicion. "I was sure he knew all about it," thought Charles, "and felt as if I was suspended between heaven and earth. Oh, what a relief it was! It is the first, and I will take care it shall be the last time I ever act so carelessly again, as sure as I live. If professional thieves suffer only half what I have done since evening, and for no crime whatever, I am sure they would never follow their trade very long. Let me see. I placed the package under the sofa mattress. If either had seen it lying on my table, I should have blown my brains out. But where is it? Gone, said he, in astonishment, as he examined in every place. Gone! Who could have taken it? No one knew it to be there. Gone it is, undoubtedly. I have searched everywhere, but it can't be found. Good heavens! What shall I do? Which of them could have taken it? No, either of them could have seen or felt it. It must be here. Charles searched in every imaginable nook and corner, but could not discover the missing roll of bills. He had placed it under the sofa mattress, he was confident, and unknown to either of his visitors. Whither or how it had disappeared was a marvel. Distracted with countless thoughts and emotions, he put on his cloak, and late as it then was, left the apartment, walking aimlessly up and down first one street and then another, until he found himself opposite the theatre, with its blazing lamps, oil lamps, and variously colored lanterns. More from habit than design, Charles passed its portals, and soon found himself among a crowd of gay acquaintances. "Seen Redgill?" asked he of one and another, until, tired with waiting, he was about to depart, when both met at the door. "Did you see a small paper packet lying about my room, near the sofa, tonight?" asked Charles carelessly. "A small paper packet? No. Why, have you lost one? What was it like?" "Well, it didn't look like anything particularly, but it was, you know, very much like one of our bank packets. It was a packet of long envelopes and other papers." "Bank packets, eh?" "No, my boy, I didn't see it. I was too much taken up with thinking of money matters. If you remember, you said you hadn't a penny, and I was racking my brain to devise means for borrowing some, for there is a grand bal masque on here tonight." "Is it very valuable? You look vexed, perplexed. What's the matter, Charlie, my boy? If I can help you out of the scrape, command me, you know." "Well, the fact is, Philip, the package I speak of, which so much resembles a bank package, contains something very valuable, more valuable than my life, in fact. Without I recover it, my existence is henceforth a blank and worthless. I am dishonored." "Don't say dishonored, my boy. That is impossible. You could never do anything which would reflect dishonor on yourself, or your many acquaintance. Cheer up, you may find it tomorrow. If it is 100 or 2 you want, you can have it in a day or 2 from me even." Charles went home almost mad. "Lucky thing I called at Warbeck's apartments tonight," said Redgill to himself, as soon as Charles had left him. "What brought that money on his table? Methinks I smell a very large-sized mouse," said he, with a fiendish smile, drinking wine at a small wine shop near the theatre. "I managed to abstract it rather neatly, I must confess. His head wasn't turned more than a minute, and it contains £2,000. What care I if the fool is ruined? I only wish it were Ned Warbeck instead. How my heart would leap with joy, the young viper!" Chapter 22. Fearful encounter between the skeleton crew and the smugglers. "Well, Dolphin, and what news of this new wonder, Wildfire, Ned?" asked the smuggler chief. "He has joined Lieutenant Garnet, say you?" "He has." "And what does he intend to do?" "He swears to exterminate the skeleton crew." "So much the better for us, then," laughed the smuggler chief. "If young Ned Warbeck can only rid the seas of such monsters as they are, then there may be some chance of honest folks, like ourselves, getting along a bit farther than we have done of late," said the chief, with a dry grin. "Just so, Sea-Hawk," the Dolphin replied. "If he can manage to rid us of such grim devils as they are, all well and good, for, you see, we don't stand much of a chance with them, for they have played the very devil with us smugglers of late years. And as to Deathwing, I don't think there is any hope of getting him out of the way, for he seems to be made of cast iron. I only hope this young daredevil, Ned Warbeck, will only let us alone, though," said the chief, "because you know he might turn his attention this way after doing the first job. That's just what he is going to do." "You don't mean that?" "I do, though. I found out all his plans, as well as his instructions." "Indeed, how?" "You remember what I said about the marriage at Walton Abbey, and of Deathwing running away with the young bride?" "Yes." "Well, Garnet and Wildfire Ned, accompanied by Bob Bertram, and others, started in pursuit. Did they overtake the crew? That you will quickly hear. For some time, Wildfire, Ned, and Garnet continued the chase over hedge and ditch, but they went at such a terrific pace that in less than half an hour they had distanced all who followed them, save Bob Bertram. But still they could not make out or trace the route taken by Deathwing. In about an hour, however, they perceived some of the band in the distance. With swords drawn, they shouted in defiance, and made at them. But the skeleton rascals declined the combat. The chase then continued. But, as before, they lost sight of them, for the last trick was only a ride to gain time in order that Deathwing and his fair captive might get off clear. Clever, artful devils, said the chief, with a gruff laugh. And did they get off clear? He asked. They did. Wildfire Ned rode like a man in every direction after them. But it was all to no purpose. They escaped, and Deathwing and his crew made their way to the seashore, and got safely on board their phantom ship before Garnet or Wildfire Ned could overtake them. Well, and what next? Wildfire Ned and Bob Bertram made the best of their way to Garnet's ship, the Diamond, and went on board. The ship set sail immediately in search of the skeleton crew, and every man on board swore to be revenged. If they fall in with Deathwing, then we may expect to hear of some stirring news, said the chief. If they conquer Deathwing, or he conquer them, it's all the same to us, you know, Dolphin. True, replied the messenger. But I would much rather hear they had made short work of the skeleton crew, for we can generally manage to escape the revenue cruisers, but it would puzzle the very devil to get out of the way of these grim and ghastly wretches, said the Dolphin. So far we agree, said the grim chief. But now to business. Have you found out anything more about that vessel you wrote to me about? What, that ship which we have long expected from the East Indies? Yes. Of course I have. She is now in the offing, and if the wind rises, we may expect her abreast of this place by midnight. Good. Did you hear how many men she carries? Only 15. That ain't too many. So far, so good. But about her guns, Dolphin, that's the question. I heard she had 4. But I know better. She hasn't got a single one. Not one? No, not even a pop gun on board. What's her name, say you? The Sea Spray. Then she will prove an easy prize? No doubt of it. What's her cargo? Silks, spices, and gold dust. Hem, said Seahawk. Then we must prepare for her. Tell the night watch to have a bright lookout, and get all the boats ready. How is the weather? It looks as if we should have a dense fog tonight. So much the better then, said the smuggler chief. There's nothing half so nice as a thick fog when one wants to come up to a craft unseen. Get all the boats ready, and let them be moored outside the cave for instant service. These orders were obeyed. During the day great preparations were made to board and capture the long-expected East Indiaman, and a lookout man was perched high upon the rocks outside, with telescope in hand, watching the distant movements of the Sea Spray, as she lay becalmed in the far distance, her sails lazily flapping in the foggy atmosphere. As night approached the wind freshened, and all was wild excitement and merriment among the smugglers, who looked forward to the capture of the vessel with impatient joy. Master Tim saw all the warlike preparations going on, and felt very uneasy. The sight of pistols and knives, cutlasses, boarding pikes, and the like struck terror to his soul. But he dared not show it, or express any thought about the danger all were about to encounter. He even tried to smile and look merry. But it was all sham. Poor Tim could be as brave as anyone as far as words went, but when it came to blows and hard knocks he wished himself 1,000 miles away. Some of the smugglers provided Tim with plenty of arms. As I must go, thought Tim, and as there is no getting away from these villainous, black-looking band of smugglers, I might as well arm myself to the teeth. The more weapons I have, the greater chance I have for my life. With this thought uppermost in his mind, Master Tim put on an immense pair of water boots that reached above the knee, and although he could scarcely walk in them, on account of their weight and clumsiness, he never said a word. For, thought Tim, it won't do to let these devils think I am afraid, after all the hard lies I have told them today. Besides, if they thought I wanted to get away, they'd scrag me on the instant. Next he put on an immense waist belt, and stuck into it 6 pistols, all double-shot. Besides these, he thrust into his belt a heavy cutlass, a dagger, and a long knife. Not satisfied with all these warlike preparations, he seized a heavy blunderbuss, and filled up to the muzzle with powder and shot. This he slung on his back, and walked up and down the cave, thinking, "It's very nasty, dangerous work, attacking ships. If this one Seahawk is going to capture tonight had been well armed and manned by a stout crew, I shouldn't have thought of rigging myself this way. I should have fallen on to their decks, like a dead man, and let the smugglers fight it out their own way, and then join the victors. But if the ship is unarmed, and there is much gold on board, I want to throw dust into Seahawk's eyes, and get as much as possible for my share, and then, when I have got the gold dust, I shall hook it, for I know the way now into old Nettle's place up through that trapdoor." Tim tried to look very fierce, and smoked a pipe to keep down his fearful feelings. But he looked like a walking arsenal more than anything else, and could scarcely move with the immense weight girt about him. From time to time as night closed in, word was passed from the watchers outside that the sea spray was gradually approaching. When first he heard this report, Tim pretended to be overjoyed, and very anxious to encounter the stranger and show the smuggler band what a courageous fellow he was. But when Seahawk at last gave the order for all his men to make ready to start out on the expedition, Tim's heart began to flutter and to beat very loudly. He took a good draught of rum, however, and, as well as he could, got into the boat. When all had assembled at the mouth of the cave, Seahawk called the 6 boats' crew together, and gave them his final instructions. 3 of the boats with muffled oars, under the Dolphin's command, was to go on some little distance ahead, and creep through the dense fog unseen, so as to attack the stranger on the windward side. Seahawk, with the other 3 boats, would follow, and at the same time assail the sea spray on the leeward side. At a given signal the boats put off towards the doomed ship, which had been suddenly becalmed opposite the smuggler's cave. It could just be seen through the thick fog, and Seahawk was delighted with the prospect of its speedy capture. "We'll make short work of it," said the chief to Tim, in a jolly tone. "I believe you," Tim replied, in a soft voice, with a ghastly attempt at a smile. Onwards the boat's crews rowed in dead silence. In a short time they came within full view of the dark sides of the vessel, as, like an ominous object, it loomed out through the dense mists. The first 3 boats had got round to the other side of the vessel, and were waiting for Seahawk's signal. This was soon given. With a loud shout the smugglers' boats pulled towards the vessel. "Let 1 man remain with each boat," said the chief, "while all the rest board the craft." "I'll do that," said Tim eagerly. "No, you won't," said the chief. "You are to be the first man to board the ship." "Here we are, up you go," said Seahawk, shoving Tim up the ship's side with so much violence that Tim fell over the bulwarks. Tim was awfully scared, for he expected to be shot or stabbed the instant he reached the deck. Judge of his happiness, then, when he discovered there was not a single soul on deck. Perceiving this, and before any of his comrades could clamber up, he began cutting, and slashing, and swearing at imaginary foes, stamping his feet, and hacking at old empty barrels, with such a vengeance, and so much noise as to make every one believe that he was at the moment performing prodigies of valor. "Die! Down! Surrender, villains!" he roared. And the more he shouted, the more he cut and hacked right and left, without meeting with a foe, except a cow and a few sheep on board, which he slaughtered unmercifully in a few seconds. When the smugglers leaped upon the deck, they were astonished at not meeting with or finding any opposition. Tim was puffing and blowing, as if wearied and exhausted with his terrific efforts, and pointed to the hatchway, shouting, "I have beaten the villains 10-1, they are down the hatchway, down after them, my bold boys, down after them." Perceiving blood on his sword, the smugglers believed what he said, and therefore rushed down into the hold of the ship, sword in hand, bent on slaughter. Tim was immensely tickled that he had earned a reputation for valor so cheaply, and thanked his stars Seahawk believed him. While Tim was alone on the deck, however, he suddenly heard unearthly shouts, screams, oaths, and the like proceed from the hold of the ship. "What's all that?" thought Tim, trembling in every limb. "I wonder if they have found out anyone. I didn't see any of the crew." He was not left long in suspense. There issued from the hold, the cabin, and the forecastle of the ship a band of skeletons, sword in hand. Tim, at the first sight of them, fell on his knees, and then slipped into an empty water barrel that was nearby. From this place he could perceive all that passed. The smuggler chief had been deceived, and so had Dolphin. But how and by whom neither of them could tell. Instead of boarding the East Indiaman, they found themselves on the decks of the phantom ship. The confusion, uproar, and clanging of arms that now ensued were dreadful. Seahawk, Dolphin, and the rest of the bold smugglers fought like demons. "To the boats! To the boats!" shouted Seahawk above the din of battle. All his men endeavored to fight their way back again to the boats as directed by the chief. But their retreat was cut off. The skeleton crew, infuriated against their old enemies, the smugglers, fought with desperation. Pistol shots scattered about the decks like hailstones, and Tim, unfortunate as ever, had the misery to find that more than one stray bullet struck the cask in which he was hiding, and grazed his body and legs, but beyond a few scratches he escaped unhurt. Seahawk, as brave as a lion, fought long and desperately with the grim crew, but many of his men were dying and wounded around him. "To the boats! To the boats!" he again shouted. Many of his followers did not need this second warning, but leaped over the sides of the vessel, and plunged into the sea in wild despair. On every part of the ship did the skeleton crew swarm like bees. Up the rigging they climbed like monkeys, making the most hideous noises. Deathwing, with his black banner on high, and with an immense cutlass in hand, seemed to mow down Seahawk's men, and in less than 15 minutes from the time the action commenced, the phantom ship was cleared of all its intruders save the dead and dying. The smugglers, entrapped as they had been, fought like bears, but nothing could withstand Deathwing and his grisly band. And ere Seahawk and his boats pushed off from the vessel, 2 cannons, loaded up to the muzzle with grape and canister shot, were fired after them, and the missiles of death swept the waters around the phantom ship with a hissing and fatal sound. Chapter 23. Ned's first battle, the ship on fire. After the action, the first thing the skeleton crew did was to examine the bodies of the dead and dying. Some were cast overboard immediately, but those whose wounds gave some hope of recovery were, for the moment, more mercifully dealt with, for they were reserved for after tortures. Tim was in an unfortunate position. He was neither dead nor wounded. But from the passing remarks of the skeleton crew, he almost wished that he had been dead, for he trembled to think what tortures and unearthly agony they intended to make all such as he was undergo. "What an unlucky devil I am!" sighed Tim. "I no sooner get out of one trouble than I fall into another. It's out of the frying pan into the fire with me always. I wonder what star I was born under, for there's no good fortune ever befalls me. Hey go! Just hear those grim monsters talking. Why, the smugglers were gentlemen, compared to such fiendish devils as these." Tim crouched still more closely in his hiding place. "How many dead men have the smugglers left behind?" asked Deathwing, when they had all been counted and thrown overboard. "Over a dozen," was the reply. "Good," said Deathwing, with a chuckle. "Just hear him," groaned Tim. "I do believe, if there had only been 3 dozen he'd jump for joy. Oh! Horrors upon horrors accumulate. How many wounded? We have found 6. Only half a dozen, that is not a great number," said Deathwing. "There ought to be 3 or 4 dozen, at least." "Yes, so there would have been, Deathwing, but those who were slightly wounded jumped into the water or into their boats, at the hazard of drowning or breaking their necks, rather than remain in our hands." "Ha!" said the grim chief. "They know us of old. Hark! How the villain sighs," said poor Tim. "I shouldn't wonder if he hasn't got tears in his eyes over it because they wouldn't stay behind to be skinned alive, poor devils. I wish we had but one sound man among the 6 prisoners," said Deathwing. "I should like to make an example of him on the spot." "Oh-h!" groaned Tim. "I'm in for it this time. They'll cut me limb from limb, but it's better to die here like a rat in this barrel than to get into their hands." Tim, up to the present moment, had not dared to poke his long nose out of his hiding place, yet, out of curiosity, he now did, so as to see what they were about to do with their wounded prisoners. The moment his head appeared, one of the crew with a loud shout of joy jumped towards him, and seized him by the scruff of the neck. In a second the poor fellow was dragged out of the hogshead, and pulled along the deck towards where Deathwing stood. "What, another of 'em?" said the grim chief, with a loud laugh of mockery. "And armed to the teeth, I perceive! This must be one of the head leaders, I think. Disarm him." In the twinkling of an eye, Tim's blunderbuss, pistols, dagger, knife and cutlass were taken from him, and he knelt before the chief, trembling and quaking. Around him danced several dozen skeletons in wild joy, snapping their fingers and making the most horrible noises. "I think I have seen this rascal's face before," said Deathwing, with an oath. "So do I. Yes, that's him. Are you not one of my worst enemy's followers, Wildfire Ned?" "Me? Lord bless you, no," said Tim. "I never heard of his name afore in all my life." "Liar!" said one, giving him a slap that made his jaws ache again. "Liar!" another one remarked, kicking him vigorously from behind. "Didn't we get up a tree after you, and you escaped? Yet now I come to look at the rogue more closely, the more I am convinced he is one of young Warbeck's followers," said Deathwing. "And as such, he must die," said all in a solemn chorus. When the verdict was made known, the whole of the skeleton crew commenced dancing around him in a wild, unearthly fashion, and as each came near him, they gave the luckless fellow a kick or a blow, until he was black and blue. "Bind him hand and foot," said the grim chief. "This rascal has many secrets to reveal about Wildfire Ned and Seahawk's gang. We must extract them all from him, or cut him joint from joint. Bind him hand and foot, and tie him to the main mast." This was done. All the crew, save one, all the while stood round the victim, while Deathwing began to question him. So silent were the crew upon extracting from him every item about Wildfire Ned, that they took but little notice of the intense fog which now enveloped the ship, or where it was drifting to. "The first question I shall ask you," Deathwing began, "is, do you know where Wildfire Ned is? If you do not, confess, your arms shall be." At that instant, a loud booming noise was heard, and not far off either. Every one rose to his feet. In a second after, an 18-pound cannon shot came crushing through the bulwarks. "Treachery!" Deathwing cried. Bang! Crash! Were the sounds repeated. "Every one to his post!" Whiz bang! Came another shot, and almost frightened off all the hair from Tim's head, as he stood tied to the mast, and unable to move. "Who are they? Can you make them out?" shouted out Deathwing to his crew. "A frigate is bearing down to windward of us. Steer the Phantom in towards the shore. Double shot your guns. 'Tis the Diamond, I can make her out through the fog. Fire away! Never surrender! Up with the black flag!" The fight now became hot and desperate. Cannons flashed and roared, but still the frigate did not approach any nearer. In truth, she could not do so. They were too near land, and the Phantom was of a much lighter draught, and could draw less water. Hence it was that Deathwing had the advantage of his enemy, for he now neared the land, and seemed bent upon stranding his vessel and escaping rather than surrender. But he was much mistaken. Although it was the Diamond frigate he was fighting, he little dreamt what was in store for his crew. Although now the shots of the frigate took but little effect from the increasing distance, Deathwing was surrounded with dangers. Lieutenant Garnet with one boat, Wildfire Ned with another, were pulling through the fog at a desperate rate towards the Phantom, to cut it out from grounding, and were followed by Bob Bertram in a third, all of which were crowded with brave blue jackets. When least expected, Deathwing heard the gallant shouts of his fearless foes. "Let every one arm to the teeth," he said. "Stand ready to resist boarders." Another loud shout was given by the blue jackets as they pulled towards the vessel. "Pour broadsides of grape into them," said Deathwing. In a second the boats bumped against the ship's sides and were made fast. "They are upon us," said Deathwing, brandishing his sword. In a second the gallant tars swarmed on to the ship's decks. The first to spring among the skeleton crew was Wildfire Ned. With a loud shout he dashed at Deathwing, and cleaved him to the deck. Wildfire Ned was quickly followed by Lieutenant Garnet, who, at the head of his brave boat's crew, cut their way up on to the decks. And close at his heels followed Bob Bertram, supported by a strong body. The fighting was now dreadful on all sides. Wherever Wildfire Ned dashed he left behind him dozens of victims. Tim was in great danger, both from friend and foe. Glancing shots, and accidental strokes from swords and cutlasses came very near him. By continual shouting he attracted the attention of Bob Bertram, who immediately cut the ropes and set him free. Tim took advantage of his liberty to conceal himself as best he could under the bulwarks. But he amused himself very greatly by pounding on the skull of one of Deathwing's band, who had been literally smashed to atoms by Wildfire Ned's blows. The skeleton crew, finding that their vessel must now be stranded, and no hope remained of saving her, determined to blow her up. "Fire the magazine!" roared Deathwing, high above the din of battle. "Blow Wildfire Ned and his followers to atoms!" "Ha! Ha! So you are getting something for yourself this time, eh?" said Tim, as he recognized Deathwing's voice. "But you don't catch me staying here if there's anything of that sort going to take place." So saying, Master Tim crawled over the vessel's side, and got into one of the boats, and lay there very snugly out of harm's way. Wildfire Ned, however, had a terrible task before him. He wanted to find the missing bride. He searched through the cabin, but no trace of her could be found. Not to be foiled, he looked everywhere. "Blow up the magazine!" roared Deathwing again. As he spoke, a terrible thought crossed Ned's mind. Perhaps the fiends have placed the young bride there. The thought was almost too horrible. With desperation and vengeance in his face, Wildfire Ned leaped into the hold below, sword in hand. Led by instinct, but why he knew not, Ned rushed madly to the stern of the vessel. In the lower hold he perceived a long fusee burning. There remained but 2 or 3 inches of it. In a few seconds it would reach the powder. "'Tis for life or death," said Ned. With a fearful leap he descended into the lower hold. All was pitch darkness around him. Save the bright red fusee spluttering and burning, not a glimmer of light could be seen. He groped his way along the bottom of the ship. But when least he expected it, he was grasped by a skeleton hand. With an oath, Wildfire Ned drew his dirk. A terrible conflict ensued. 1 minute more, and the magazine would explode. "We shall die together, young Warbeck," said the skeleton. And now began a duel which never had equal before. In that dark hold they struggled for mastery. It was a terrific struggle. At last, with a mighty effort, Wildfire Ned snatched up a small hatchet which his foe had let fall. With one fearful blow he crushed in the skull of his grim enemy. With a loud shout and laugh of triumph, Wildfire Ned ran towards the deadly fusee. The sparks were even then sputtering near to some waste powder. In a second more all would be lost. He fell upon the fusee. He quenched its flame carefully in his hand. Next instant, with a mighty blow of the axe, he smashed in the magazine door. With a cry of joy, Ned saw before him the stolen bride. She was tied unto several powder barrels. This was Deathwing's especial order. Ned cut the cords which bound her, and let in a torrent of sea water into the powder, and swamped the magazine. The bride was insensible. He took her in his arms and hurried to the hatchway. Then a fearful cry was heard from above. "I defy you!" roared the terrible voice of Deathwing. "In 1 moment more the ship will be blown in the air. Ha! Ha! The powder magazine is open! The fusee is burning! Away, my men, away to your rendezvous on shore! 1 moment more and Lord Walton's sister will be a black and charred mass. Vengeance against Wildfire Ned! Eternal enmity is between us! The ship is on fire!" Ned heard Garnet shouting. "Where is young Warbeck? The ship is on fire in 2 places! Help! Help!" cried Ned, from the bottom of the lower hold. His voice was heard from above. "Help! Help!" In a moment, Garnet and Bob Bertram, with a few others, threw down the end of a long rope to Ned. Young Warbeck tied it round his body. Clasping the unconscious maiden in his arms, he was being drawn out of the hold, when the flames burst out all around him. "Quick! Quick! Or we shall perish," said Ned. "Those skeleton fiends have fired their vessel in several places." "Pull away, lads, pull away!" shouted Garnet. The flames increased every second. And yet with all the efforts of the seamen, Ned could not get higher than the lower hold. The rope had caught in some bolt or block below. Here was a perilous position. The flames were now almost all around him. He hung suspended between life and death. In a second more the forked flames would catch the maiden's dress. Bob Bertram, without a word, slipped down the rope and disentangled it. A loud shout from above rewarded his valor and daring. "Quick! Quick!" faintly cried Ned, now almost suffocated with smoke. "Quick! Quick! I am choking! Quick, Bob, or all is lost!" With the energy of despair the sailors pulled away at the rope. Yet all the time they had to fight against the vile skeleton crew, who every moment were trying to cut the rope. Some were up the rigging, firing down on the brave men. Others plunged overboard, and swam away towards the shore. All was a scene of intense excitement. Yet, with a tremendous effort, Wildfire Ned kept himself alive amid the dense smoke and flames around him. With a ringing cheer he reached the deck. "Saved! Saved!" said Ned, and almost fell from sheer weakness. But at that moment a low, rumbling noise like distant thunder caught the ears of all. It was the sound of a mighty torrent of water rushing into the ship's hold. "The ship is scuttled! Away! Away!" cried many voices. In a moment more the ship trembled from stem to stern. In a second she broke into halves. Chapter 24. In which Philip Redgill is forced to raise the wind to pay his debts to Captain Jack, and in which the reader beholds the phantom legs, and is introduced to the skeleton barber. Notwithstanding his robbery of Charlie Warbeck, Philip Redgill had not near enough of money wherewith to pay the heavy debt Captain Jack had against him. Which way to turn he knew not. "I must do something, or I shall swing on a gibbet in less than a month's time. Oh, there's no earthly hope of raising the wind out of him," thought Philip in regard to his father, "and I know not how to manage the matter. Let me see." And he went on with his calculations very rapidly. How strange it is that those who borrow will seldom lend in return. Among all my acquaintance I know of none who at all seem inclined to accommodate me. They entertain no doubt of my honesty, so they say, but as to lending a fellow 1,000 or 2, that is out of the question. Well, I must either post up the money or swing and lose the 400 already gained. I have 3 clear days yet. I'll have a glass of brandy and think a while. The brandy and a good French dinner wonderfully enlightened Mr. Philip's faculties, for he had but just pulled off his coat for a comfortable snooze ere a bright thought flashed across his mind. Why didn't I think of it before? Why, there's old Sir Andrew, the money-lender and insurance broker. Just the man, by Jupiter! If he fails, why then I'm done. I'll go to him at once. Old Sir Andrew was one of those very smart men, an insurance office president, who had sprung from nothing, but had become possessed of very large means, acquired rapidly, and none could imagine how. A constant church attendant, and economical in his donations to charities, he was generally considered to be one of the pillars of his church, and a particular strong man on 'change, whenever he deigned to visit that extensive gambling salon. From the number of persons who had constantly visited his offices in times past, it was shrewdly imagined he had done a considerable amount of very close shaving, in bill discounting, and perhaps was not over-scrupulous, or troubled with many qualms of conscience in financial transactions. This was the individual to whom Philip applied in his emergency. "Again?" asked Sir Andrew, when he recognized his visitor. "Come again, so soon? Why, dear me, Philip, what can the matter be? Take a seat. Oh, that's it, eh? Want £5,000 for a week? Phew! Young man, you talk as if pounds could be picked up in the street. Why, bless you, I haven't got such a sum by me. Besides, you owe me £10,000 already, for which you have given nothing but promissory notes, with interest, on the death of your father, and that event looks as distant as ever, judging by his ruddy countenance and activity on 'change the other day. Your father is speculating very extensively of late, but no one knows, in these squally times, how speculations may turn out. Things are not what they used to be, Mr. Philip. Every man with 200 or 300 in his pocket gambles in stock now, and if things continue as they have been going on for the past 6 months, I shouldn't be at all surprised to hear of our banks closing, and to go popping off all round us like firecrackers. It can't be done, sir. I have been unwise in lending you money at all, perhaps, on such precarious terms, and really, if I were to speak the truth, Mr. Philip, a little less of horse racing, wine parties, ladies in satin, and so forth, would greatly improve you, both morally and physically. But young men will be young men, you know," added old Sir Andrew, with a peculiar look which gave the lie to all his affected modesty and sanctity. "Why not try the Jews? Your worthy father's name is good, you know," added the moneylender with a grin. "But I suppose you have written his name instead of your own sufficiently often, perhaps, eh? Ha! Ha! Well, well, don't fret and bite your nails. You wish he was in heaven, you meant to say. Well, I hope we shall all get there one of these days, but it is very tight times on 'Change, I can assure you. Why, a young man like you should have ingenuity enough, I think, to raise such an amount as that, without much trouble. There are plenty of men who would jump at the chance of obliging you, Philip, particularly as you will be very rich one of these days. Ha! Ha!" Despite the utmost importunity, old Sir Andrew was inexorable, and smiled at the disappointment, rage, and revenge, which evidently flashed from the young man's eyes, for, although he begged for favors which were not granted, and loathed the very person from whom he had expected to receive them, yet he dared not give vent to his almost suffocating fury, for old Sir Andrew, mild-spoken, and perfectly at ease, held forged papers in his possession, which hung over Philip's head as the sword of Damocles. "I wish I could poison the old miser," muttered the youth, walking back towards his apartments in high dudgeon. "I'll make a smash somewhere before the week is out, if I swing for it." He must have cash from somewhere, he thought, so determined to do that which many, very smart, men had the reputation for having done during life, namely, to get money by any adroit means that should escape detection and proof, or, at most, only injure his name, for your greatest rogues, after all, he thought, are usually the greatest sticklers for so-called honor and reputation. "What's the difference if you are not found out?" he muttered. "Who can point out to one honest man? The true secret of success is to get all you can, and keep all you get. How many can say the foundation of their prosperity was laid in undisputed honesty? How would the best of us fare if justice was fairly meted out to all? Go as close to the jail as you please, but don't go in, is the maxim in our times. Rich men's knavery consigns them to the ease and luxuriance of a palace. Poor men, for the same, may rot in dungeons. Do whatever you please, but don't get found out, is the practical philosophy of the day. Those who succeed, retire upon large fortunes, and are austere bigots and pillars of hypocrisy. Those who fail, are cuffed and kicked, and never stop rolling until they roll into the grave." Thus mused Mr. Philip Redgill, bent on fresh crime. Chapter 25. Philip Redgill continues to play his game of villainy. He determines to marry an heiress. The discovery of false notes in the money safe at the India House. Charlie's remorse and confession. Let not the innocent suffer for the guilty. One would have thought that such a success in his system of villainy in thus becoming the slave of Captain Jack would have been a very practical, as it certainly was a very expensive lesson to young Redgill, seeing that he had agreed to pay the great thief-taker £5,000 for his silence. Yet, instead of cooling, it only seemed to irritate Philip, and to such a degree, that he was not sober one day for a whole week after his interview with the renowned thief-taker, but nevertheless bore up under his losses with the airs of an honest millionaire. His father was rich, everyone said, and had ships at sea, which, laden with teas and silks, were on their way from China. The old man won't be nice to 1,000 or 2 when they arrive. Why, old Sir Andrew's office has insured them for £500,000, so their cargoes must be worth a trifle. Go ahead, father! Make all the cash you can, I'll manage to spend it for you when you drop off the books. It was certainly true that Mr. Redgill, Sr., had extensive dealings on 'Change, for in the single item of 2 ships homeward bound he held insurance policies for not less, as we have said, than £500,000. What a good thing it would be if young Redgill could manage to marry my only daughter, Fanny! I'd see if it can't be done, thought the miserly old Sir Andrew. It would be a capital match. But I see a great many fond parents have the same idea in regard to their daughters, judging from the endless invitations to balls, and see, Philip is continually receiving. He'll be a fine catch for someone. I'll see what can be done in that matter, and consult with my lady. Old Sir Andrew's consultation with his lady was so far successful that Philip and Fanny were soon on most excellent terms, but as she was anything but a beauty, even when assisted by paints, flowers, silks, and false hair, many gallants about town, of inquisitive turn of mind, were unable to imagine the reasons which had determined so good-looking a young man as Philip Redgill to pay such strict court to her. The truth was that Philip wanted money, and was greatly embarrassed. He even desired the match, hoping thus to draw heavily both on her father and his own. But although he pressed his suit with much ardor, the intended marriage was always postponed at Redgill Senior's request. But if Mr. Philip Redgill could withstand his losses and disappointments in his career of crime with so much equanimity of temper, and even proposed to himself matrimony as a solace for all his losses, it was not so with Charlie Warbeck. When that young gentleman, full of repentance, had calmly reflected upon his perilous situation, he was filled with alarm, and trembled for the fate which must surely overtake him. He attended the India House as usual, but day by day he became more deathly pale. His limbs seemed to have lost all strength, and he moved to and fro with unsteady gait and aching heart. As often as he approached the huge iron safe where, in a moment of madness, he had cleverly placed a packet of false notes in lieu of those he had lost, in order to lull suspicion for a time, he became dizzy from excitement, and could scarcely stand. Remorse and shame were punishing him more fearfully than actual imprisonment could have done. When the day arrived upon which the India House usually issued a statement of their affairs, he was in a high fever, and despite all remonstrance from his good old landlady, Dame Worthington, and old Sir Richard Warbeck, he persisted in going to the India House as usual, and even counterfeited gaiety. The accounts soon showed a large deficit, and a buzz of astonishment was heard among all the clerks. The directors of the India House seemed undisturbed, nor did they betray any token of great concern. They smiled as blandly as before, and even joked with the terrified clerks, who were unable to speak, for all of them were implicated in suspicion, and none could imagine on whose head should rightly fall the actual guilt. Each was distrustful of the other. Towards the close of business hours Charlie became really ill, but as he had been unwell for several days previous, no remark was passed upon his going home earlier than usual. Excitement caused fever, and the latter superinduced lightness and flightiness of the mind. In truth, he was not now sane. When he entered the house, Dame Worthington gazed upon him for a few moments, and then burst into tears. He was unable to walk upstairs, hence the good old dame led him into the snug parlor, and put him to bed there upon the couch, and sent for medical assistance. The whole house was astonished at the sudden and dangerous change in the young man, and when Clara Haylark heard of it, she rushed downstairs in great haste, and proffered her services in any way in which they might prove useful, for Clara had a lurking suspicion that her curls and captivating ways might have had a little something to do with Charlie's sudden indisposition. At least she intimated as much to her mother, in answer to a query, for she solemnly sighed, turned up her eyes with eloquent meaning, and said, "Poor Charles! I'm sure he cannot blame me, mother dear," and covered her face, the little hypocrite, with a lace-edged handkerchief. For several days Charles remained half demented, and in high fever. Dame Worthington, for reasons to be hereafter made known, and good ones too, was crazed with care, and scarcely left him for one moment, either by night or day, but carefully watched his bedside with more than maternal care. Mistress Haylark, the fair Clara's mother, also was loud in her advice, and concocted various little palatable dishes and drinks, which Clara, in her curls, and with a serious comic voice and gesture, administered to the patient with great grace of manner and captivating attitude. She would read to him, and tell him stories, Dame Worthington always being present, sitting in her chair at a distance, in the shadows of the room, rocking herself in thought, and gazing with a look of care and anxiety upon her poor sick boy. And when Charles was able to move about again, Clara would invariably go to the harp and play a few soft, plaintive airs, which soothed her patient, and won his affection more deeply than the index of his eyes had ever before betrayed to the gay and light-hearted Clara. At the close of an afternoon spent in this manner, and his courage being greatly stimulated by a glass of brandy prescribed by the doctor, Charlie said, "Oblige me, Clara, by singing that beautiful air again." His accents seemed so earnest that, as Clara complied, her voice and fingers trembled with unusual excitement. At the close of the piece, No one being nigh, Charles approached her, and without a gesture of warning, kissed her. She rose as if shot, looked at him inquiringly for a moment, burst into tears, and left the room. No one could imagine why Clara absented herself from the parlor for several days following, and not even her mother, although, from the soft and mysterious conversations held by Mistress Haylark and Dame Worthington upon the landings, and in the passages, on several occasions, it was apparent that womanly sagacity had intuitively suggested the real facts to their minds. Although they only smiled and nodded and winked in that peculiar manner known to mothers and very elderly persons. Sir Richard Warbeck, it may be taken for granted, was not remiss in visiting his protégé, but evinced the greatest anxiety for his health and speedy recovery. His visits were daily, and he always brought some trifle which might be grateful to a sick palate, but Mistress Haylark, that aged thermometer of passing events, always noticed that Dame Worthington always was in unusual spirits upon his coming, but suddenly depressed whenever he departed. There was something mysterious between them, Mistress Haylark thought, but what it was it seemed impossible to divine. As Clara seemed to be constantly in high spirits, and delighted always in company with the good-looking Charlie, Mistress Haylark began to assume airs of great matronly dignity, and if the truth must be told, confessed that she began to feel older and older every day, and that her sole thought was concerning the future happiness of her darling beautiful daughter. Mesdames Haylark and Worthington became almost inseparable and extremely confidential, and on one occasion, when Mistress Haylark complained of a pain in her stomach and would have gone upstairs for a thimbleful of ginger wine, Dame Worthington vehemently protested, and forthwith introduced her old family specific from the top shelf behind the pickles, 40 drops of which, slightly diluted with water, effectually relieved all pain, and threw them both into such high spirits that they continued discussing family and household affairs and secrets, until long after the church clocks had chimed the hour of midnight. But while Charlie is recovering, under the combined effects of love, philosophy, and kind treatment, the directors of the India House have been assiduous in their endeavors to trace out the true depositor of the packet of counterfeit bank notes. They went to work very quietly and coolly, but despite their own, and the hawk-eyed exertions of clever detectives, Captain Jack among the rest, they were wholly unable to fasten solid suspicion upon any one of their employees. An anonymous note, evidently written in a counterfeit hand, and signed R, startled them. Charlie was the person pointed at by the unknown correspondent, but Sir Richard Warbeck and others who were consulted would not believe the insinuation, and the matter seemed to drop indefinitely. Charlie, being fully recovered in body, returned to the India House as usual, and was received with tokens of much respect by all the directors. He attempted to appear gay, but all his endeavors were vain. He was not the same person he had been, and could not look any one fairly in the face without evident effort. There was a worm at his heart gnawing deeply, daily and hourly. From being a gay, light-hearted youth, of fresh color and dashing manner, as he had always been before he knew Philip Redill, he now appeared like a person of age, on whose shoulders a heavy weight was pressing. Some thought it might arise from an unfortunate disappointment in love affairs, but these hints he parried with a faint smile, and attempted to joke in his old manner. One morning a young, bright-faced clerk was called into the director's council-room, and returned therefrom looking very pale, and with large tears standing in his eyes. "Good day, Charlie," said he to Warbeck, with much emotion. "I'm going. They don't want me any longer. I've done nothing wrong, you know. They lay no charge against me, yet I feel certain that they have formed wrong suspicions against me, on account of the unfortunate packet of counterfeit notes that was substituted for good ones in the safe a month or two ago. Good day, my boy. This will break my poor old mother's heart. She has no one to depend upon but me. I am lost, ruined, disgraced." The youth leaned upon the counter, shading his face, and tears flowed from him fast and hot. His breast heaved convulsively, and he would have fallen from weakness but that Charles placed him in a chair, and gazed upon his guileless face long and intently. Charlie's features wore a ghastly smile. His lips became bloodless and blue, and quivered with emotion as he attempted to speak. He could not speak, however, for his voice faltered, and the words stuck in his throat. Loosening his cravat to avoid a sense of strangulation, to which of late he had become sometimes subject, he seized the youth by the arm with an iron grip, and striding towards the director's council room. "Come with me," he exclaimed in a hoarse, hollow-toned voice. "Come with me! You shall not suffer for the deeds of others. Gentlemen," he began when he had shut the door and stood before the board of directors. "Gentlemen, I wish to say a few words before this young man leaves the India House. I wish to inform you." He caught the eye of old Sir Richard Warbeck gazing intently at him, and his courage failed him. Summoning all his energy, with a great effort he approached to lean upon the council table, and casting his eyes upon the ground, continued, amid a solemn silence. "I wish to inform you that I alone am answerable for the charge brought against, or supposed to exist, against this young man. I lost the money, and replaced the amount with a packet of false notes, no one else. I acknowledge it was my intention to have confessed it all on the following day. I have never had or spent a single penny of the amount, but lost it all by some unaccountable means the same evening on which I neglected to return to the India House. Prosecute me, and I will suffer cheerfully. Anything is better than the hellish remorse which I have already suffered. But do not, I beg of you, harbor suspicions against this sinless youth, on whose labor and reputation a poor widowed mother depends for bread." Charlie Warbeck sank into a chair, and wept like a child. The board of directors were astonished at such an unexpected disclosure from one of their favorite and much trusted clerks, and sat for many minutes in mute surprise and profound reflection. Chapter 26. The Phantom Legs. Philip Redgill continues his career of villainy. His friend Captain Jack, young Redgill's motives for marrying, the sudden death of his father, who caused it, Charlie Warbeck in prison, he is visited by his false friend Philip. The sudden disclosure so much appalled Sir Richard Warbeck that he hung his head, and was unconscious when Charles was led away by two burly, rough-looking men. His first impulse was to rush to Dame Worthington's, and seek for him there, but on arriving, of course, found him not at home. His agitation and tears filled the poor, fond old woman with alarm, for, from what she could gather, she imagined that Charles had been taken violently ill, or, what was far worse, perhaps had died. When Sir Richard had explained everything to her, she screamed, and sank into a fit, and Mistress Haylark, dashing into the apartment, stood almost petrified to find him supporting her in his arms, and addressing her with words of endearment. Clara was the next one to appear upon the scene, and in her curl papers struck several melodramatic attitudes, and gracefully sank into the armchair, where she gave vent to a volley of ejaculations, and relieved her young feelings in a genuine flood of tears. Philip Redgill, when informed of the affair, was consulting his intended father-in-law regarding his prospective marriage with Fanny, and heard the news with indifference, or at most with a great display of affected surprise. "Don't say so, Charlie, eh? Ah, he always was fond of fast living. That's what comes of going beyond one's means. I have learned that long ago. Poor fellow! Confessed it, eh? Well, he was an ass and no mistake. His prospects are gone, and no mistake. Not half a dozen Sir Richard Warbecks will ever reinstate him again. But about our business, Sir Andrew. As I was saying, I am devilish short, upon my word, haven't a coin in the world, and the old man refuses to come up. I have asked him. I shall be rich, as you know, one of these days. Now these two young Warbecks are out of the way, old Sir Richard is sure to make me his heir. Ah, it is a great pity! So much comes of living beyond one's means. What would you have done, Philip, if I were to have let those prettily executed pieces of paper signed by you in your father's name have gone floating about, eh?" said old Sir Andrew, grinning. "Oh, never mind all that, you know. I am an altered man now, you see. I am going to marry and settle shortly. I have sown all my wild oats, and shall prove an exemplary member of society, you know, a member of Parliament, or something of that sort, see if I don't. But how about the ship's Eclipse and racehorse? Didn't my father insure them in your office? I thought so, for £500,000, I believe. Lord! They tell me they have splendid cargoes of silks and teas on board. The last we heard of them they were sailing in company and had put into Pernambuco for water and supplies. The old man will make a pretty penny by that spec, see if he don't, and then I may expect him to sign my marriage contract. But in the meantime, good Sir Andrew, let me have 1,000 or 2, say £5,000, that ain't much, you know. I want it for a special purpose. Come, open your heart for once, old fellow, you'll be my father-in-law soon, I hope. Sir Andrew, the old usurer, did open his heart, and in view of the expected marriage between Philip and Fanny, his only daughter, let the intended husband have the amount he required. Philip passed a few moments with his intended in the garden, but left the house suddenly. But why did he leave his intended bride so hurriedly? The reason was this: while with one arm round Fanny's waist he was pouring soft nothings in the ear of his intended bride, and forgetful for the moment of all the villainy and ruin he had committed in the world, the startled maiden screamed aloud in horror. Philip, drawing his sword, and while supporting the fainting maid, turned suddenly, and, to his amazement, beheld within a few feet of him the phantom legs. The blood was frozen in his heart as he heard the ominous words. Philip Redgill, I follow you forever. See cut in No. 6. With superhuman exertion he conducted Sir Andrew's daughter in a fainting state to the mansion again, and assured the affrighted maiden that what she had seen was all imagination. But meanwhile, filled with terror at the memory of old Bertram's murder, he left the house, trembling and pale, intent upon drowning his feelings in wine. His steps were directed to a flash gambling house where he lost considerably at cards, and if the truth must be confessed, he spent the rest of the night at a house of bad repute, in company of Captain Jack and others, indulging in expensive wines and general debauchery. Having spent most of his money, except what he had paid to Captain Jack, he visited Charles Warbeck in prison, and condoled with him in an off-handed manner, and at the same time mentally chuckling at his own superior tact, and cursing Charlie's simplicity, or, as he termed it, his stupidity. Why couldn't he have kept it to himself? He could never be found out, the fool! Conscience be hanged! Whoever heard of such a thing in these days? Well, I'm all right, that's all I care about, let every one look after themselves. A rogue is honest till found out. If a man betrays himself, so much the bigger fool he is, say I. Philip's visit of consolation was of short duration, and as he departed from the prison walls he mused. So my father refuses to sanction this marriage, for some time, and for special reasons, does he? What can be his special reasons? He says he's considerably involved, and wishes to see his way clear first. The same old tune. Fathers are always the same. He never did coincide with any ideas of mine, the old brute. Well, never mind, he can't last long, that's certain, and I don't think it would take much trouble to put him out of the way, if all comes to all. Lord! What a fine time I should have then, eh? I don't care about old Sir Andrew's daughter, not a particle. She's rich and that's the main point nowadays. With these thoughts Philip visited his grey-haired father, whom he found sitting before his office fire, gazing at the glowing embers, and buried in deep thought. How the wind blows tonight, Philip! How fearfully it blows! I wonder how the sea is tonight? Is it rough weather, think you? How is it stormy, say you? Does the telegraph say so? The racehorse and Eclipse must be fairly in the channel, or near it by this time, what think you? I hope they'll get through safely, Philip, if they were to go. What then? Asked Philip laughingly. Your prospects are not centered solely in them, surely? Ah, my son, you know nothing of business yet, I see. All my prospects are in those ships, and if anything befalls them, I am R.U. Oh, the old story, thought Philip, and was so disgusted that he made his visit of very short duration, and taking up his hat, left his father's offices in profound disgust. These old fogies never will learn wisdom, thought he. As if the ships aren't fully insured, what stuff! If the old driveler don't come up to taw, I'll soon put him out of the way, and no mistake. His tune has always been the same for the past 5 years, always on the point of bankruptcy, and yet always making no end of money. Well, I'm tired of it. He shan't keep me like a beggar much longer, I know. And he paced up and down the street for some time in profound reflection. Mr. Redgill, Sr., went to his offices on the following morning as hale and hearty as ever, and appeared unchanged the same as he had already done for many years before. Telegrams from different parts of the coast, both north and south, confirmed previous rumors that the severe gale of the past few days had been unusually destructive, and that many vessels were reported wrecked or stranded. Several fast-sailing ships, which arrived the same morning, reported having passed the Racehorse and Eclipse off the Irish coast. All well. This news cheered the old man up so much that he consented to dine and go out with Philip for an evening drive. On the following morning, newspapers detailed the sad and unexpected death of the famous merchant Mr. Reddill, who was thrown from his vehicle and drowned the previous evening, while riding with his only son, Philip, the pair of horses having taken fright and ran away. The account added that Mr. Reddill, June, had a miraculous escape, but with wonderful agility he leaped from the conveyance and saved himself, the horses and carriage, with his father, having tumbled into the Thames, and were drowned. Chapter 27. Old Nettles is shaved by two of the skeleton crew. A barber's has been often, and very wisely, called a gossiping shop. If this is true of tonsorial establishments in town, it is particularly of such places in a village. In a hamlet or small town, the barber knows all the news, the latest joke, and the newest scandal. There is nothing that he does not know, in fact. No item ever escapes the professor, who cuts your hair, or shaves you. Thus thought old Nettles, the tavern keeper, a few days after the eventful and dreadful conflict between Wildfire Ned and the skeleton crew, on the ocean. For many miles around there were wild rumors of the ferocious battle which had taken place. But no two persons had the same tale to tell. Some said that Deathwing had killed young Ned Warbeck. Others swore that Deathwing and most of his crew had been drowned. But old Nettles knew differently. Yes, but how? Through the agency of Seahawk and his smuggler band. For when Seahawk and his party had been decoyed onto, and afterwards beaten away from the phantom ship, they rowed rapidly to their cave again. Later in the night, however, the sounds of distant firearms, and the booming of cannon over the ocean aroused their curiosity. They took to their boats again, and sallied forth. At a respectful distance from the scene of conflict, the smuggler chief had witnessed all, and was not slow to inform his old companion, Nettles, of the particulars. When, therefore, Nettles went into the village barber's shop to get shaved, the tonsorial professor was very loquacious, and, at great length, told him all he had heard about the conflict. "Don't be such an ass, Mr. Barber," said Nettles, waiting for his turn. "Don't be such an ass as to tell such idle tales. I tell thee that Ned Warbeck or Wildfire Ned was not killed, nor brave Lieutenant Garnet either, for Ned rescued Lord Walton's sister from the sinking ship, and she is now safe and sound at the Abbey again. Thee doesna mean that Maester Nettles, does thee?" said the astonished barber. "Yes, but I do though, and more nor that I did hear that the king has raised Wildfire Ned to the rank of a lieutenant in the navy, and has given him the command of a rakish, fast-sailing, 10-gun sloop of war, and that at this very moment he is cruising about on the bright lookout for this skeleton crew, what remains of 'em, and a pretty overhauling they'll get, too, if Wildfire Ned should fall foul on 'em. But they do say these skeletons are invincible, Maester Nettles," the barber remarked, "and can't be hurt by anything." "All stuff," said Nettles contemptuously. "I dare say they don't like hard knocks no more than common folk, if the truth was known. I don't fear none on 'em, if they did set fire to my tavern. They say they be all charmed, Maester?" "So I've heard, but don't believe it. The Red Man of the Gibbet is worse than all on 'em." "How so?" "Why, he were one o' the founders on 'em, and the story goes that he gets out of his gibbet at certain times, and plies his trade." "His trade? Why, what does thee mean, Maester Nettles?" "Mean? Why, didn't thee hear, the Red Man o' the Gibbet had been, once on a time, a barber." "A barber? Lord bless the man! Thee can't mean that." "I do, though. He were once a barber, and cut the throat of a nobleman for his money." "Awful!" "Yes, and afore they caught him he joined the skeleton crew, but was afterwards gibbeted. But that didn't seem to concern him much, for they say he can get out at certain times and seasons, and goes on the spree." "On the spree? What? A spirit goo on the spree, Maester Nettles?" "So they say, but I can never believe it, nor will I until I sees it with my own eyes." The conversation of Nettles with the village barber so much interested the open-mouthed villagers, that many lounged into the little shop to hear it. This arose from the fact that all felt greatly interested in listening to his narrative of the brave and heroic exploits of young Warbeck on sea and land, and especially interesting at the present time, since it was whispered that old Sir Richard Warbeck at the Hall was in deep grief through the sad disgrace which Charlie, Ned's elder brother, had fallen into lately in London. The sudden disappearance of the miller's daughter, the horrible murder of her rustic lover, the escape of Bob Bertram from prison, and the half-strangulation of the sexton, parish clerk, and others in the belfry by the skeleton crew, all tended to heighten the interest of any remarks old Nettles might make. This was more so when it was well known that the old tavern-keeper had actually fought a battle with the terrible Deathwing and his gang. With staring eyes and open mouths, they listened to Nettles, who gratified his audience with most alarming stories of the skeleton crew, so much so as to make many of them tremble in their shoes. It was now Nettles' turn to be shaved. He sat in the chair, and a small boy placed a napkin under his chin. Yet all the while he was laughing at the villagers about their childish hobgoblin notions regarding the skeleton crew. They in turn began to laugh also, until the shop re-echoed with their boisterous merriment. When the barber's boy, lather-box and brush in hand, had half-soaped Mr. Nettles, he gave a sudden shout of alarm and dropped his utensils on the floor. His hair stood on end with fright, and he trembled violently in every limb. And well he might. He cried for help. But the barber and his audience rushed out of the shop yelling like lunatics at the sight they saw, leaving Nettles and the boy alone. How it happened no one could imagine. But while the valiant Nettles was discoursing about and jeering the many stories about Deathwing's gang, a skeleton appeared, razor in hand, and seized Nettles by the hair of his head. Beside him, and grinning most horribly, stood the black spectre of the Red Man of the Gibbet, sharpening a razor on a strop attached to the wall, see engraving in No. 7, and preparing to shave his enemy, old Nettles, the terrified tavern-keeper. More dead than alive, Nettles shook in every limb. The barber's boy collapsed all of a heap upon the floor, and was howling like a mad dog. "Shave him!" said the black spectre, in sepulchral tones. Nettles was almost melted into a jelly. He was in the hands of his worst enemies. What became of him we shall shortly see. Chapter 28. Philip Redgill's unexpected fortune. He is alone in the world. The coroner's inquest over his father. The verdict. The villain pursues his career of crime. Sir Andrew's daughter Fanny, and what she did. The pranks of a knave. This event of his father's death filled Philip, apparently, with unbounded grief. He was so much afflicted that, at the coroner's inquest, the body having been dragged for and recovered, he could scarcely articulate a word. He averted his face from the corpse, and simply explained that the mournful accident had happened by his father driving too close to the edge of the bridge, and the first intimation he had of danger was the sudden tilting of the vehicle and the falling of the horses, with his father, into the river. The verdict rendered by the coroner's jury was accidental drowning. The funeral of the much-respected deceased was attended by numbers of well-known merchants and brokers on 'Change, who condoled with Philip upon his unexpected bereavement. Old Sir Andrew appeared seated in the first coach as one of the chief mourners, and if the size of a white handkerchief was any index of the extent of his grief, Sir Andrew's sorrow must have been of very extensive dimensions, for he held the said handkerchief to his face all the way to the cemetery and back, and sighed very often and emphatically. He did not fail to preach a sermon on the way to Philip, on the vanity of earthly things, the old hypocrite, but that youth simply sighed hypocritically, and if the truth must be told, felt extremely glad that his parent was laid in the grave. "I know what old Sir Andrew's about," mused Philip, as they rode home from the funeral. "He can't fool me. He wants me to marry his daughter, eh? What an idea! I'm not fool enough to think of such a thing now, of course not. Marry her, such a weazen-faced old maid as she is? Not I, indeed. All the governor's property is mine now. I have no more use for old Sir Andrew and his money-grubbing lot. I'm rich enough without him, and will marry some dashing belle when my father's affairs are arranged, and fool Sir Andrew, he'll see if I don't." The truth is that Philip had all along desired a marriage with Sir Andrew's daughter for the sake of money only, but now that he was master of his own actions, and inheritor of all his father's wealth, he instantly conceived different ideas. When young Redgill had returned from the funeral, he discovered that Jacob Sloman, Esq., the lawyer, had already arrived to read the will, and among the uninvited was old Moss, the Jew. After light refreshment, the company adjourned to the large parlor, where Mr. Sloman was busily engaged in arranging his papers. Sir Andrew, and a dozen other gentlemen present, intimate friends and relations of the deceased, were loud in their praises of the defunct, and nothing could be said that was too good in honor of his many inestimable qualities. He was a model father, an exemplary Christian, an honest and irreproachable merchant, upright citizen, ornament to commerce, and see, first one and then another remarked, until at last Philip began to imagine, for the first time in his life, that his father must have been much more than an ordinary gentleman. When the will was read, all the relations were much surprised to discover that nothing had been left them, and that everything had been bequeathed unreservedly to his only son. After the payment of all just and honest debts, Sir Andrew, although not related, appeared much disappointed, yet, concealing his chagrin at receiving no token of his profound friendship for deceased, gave vent to his feelings by giving long and fatherly advice to the heir. In truth, Mr. Sloman had scarcely finished reading the will, ere every one found they had important business elsewhere which required their instant attention, and did not stay one moment longer than necessary, to pay any more compliments to the memory of the exemplary Christian and model father, whom they had so loudly praised before the last will and testament had been read. For several weeks Philip visited but little, and many observed that his grief must be really genuine, or he would have appeared in company long before. Many members of polite society called at his residence and left their cards, and among them not a few intriguing ambitious mothers, who had rather suddenly discovered the vast importance of Mr. Philip Redgill, and of the unbounded friendship which they had, always, entertained for that interesting, good-looking young man. Sir Andrew, it must be confessed, was not behind any of the polite circle in frequently calling upon his young friend, and giving him fatherly advice. Yet he could not help grimly smiling at the insidious attempts, as he termed it, of the many inquisitive and industrious matrons, who were continually inviting the young man to sojourn with them for a few days, in order to drive away his deep-seated melancholy, and make love to their daughters. Perhaps might have been added. At least Sir Andrew imagined so, and did not fail to inform his wife and daughter, who threw up their hands and eyes in holy horror at the worldliness and unscrupulousness of certain parties. The true reason for Philip's non-appearance in society arose, not so much from genuine grief, or deep-rooted melancholy, at what all termed the sad and lamentable bereavement, as from anxiety to ascertain the true state of his father's affairs. In truth, he so much chafed under his confinement in the old house, and seemed so tremulous, that he never visited his father's apartments without a thrill of horrible excitement, and would often jump out of bed at night, as if suddenly alarmed by dreadful apparitions. He daily imbibed large draughts of brandy, and this resort seemed to cheer him. But the practice grew upon him hourly, so that the brandy lost much of its customary effect, and he accordingly drank deeply to sustain his drooping spirits. Not being one of the executors himself, he knew but little of his father's indebtedness, but when he questioned old Moss, the money-lending Jew, on one occasion, regarding that point, the old Israelite said that he would plainly tell him, and remarked very solemnly, "When all debts are paid, your father's estates are not worth 1 penny. He was generally considered to be worth more than he really was. He sustained many losses, and kept afloat on credit. If the racehorse and Eclipse safely arrive, there will be a little something for you, perhaps, when the cargoes are sold, but if they do not, there will not be a penny to spare. But worse than all, many of us creditors, Philip, will have to bite our fingers." It is unnecessary to say that this piece of confidential information surprised the young man considerably. But not so much as might have been expected, for, from a careful study of his father's books, he had arrived at something like the same conclusion himself. "Well, there's no help for it," thought he, drinking deeply of the brandy. "It will be a month, at least, before Lawyer Sloman and the executors can present a balance sheet. I'll marry Sir Andrew's daughter, Fanny." Philip's first visit to Sir Andrew after the funeral was of the most interesting nature. The mother, my lady, embraced him as a son. Sir Andrew shook him cordially by the hand, and heartily welcomed him once more beneath his roof. But both parents soon vacated the apartment in favor of their daughter, whose rustling silk could plainly be heard approaching upon the stairs. The meeting between the affianced was solemn and tender. Fanny struck a captivating attitude upon entering the room, tottered slightly towards the sofa, holding a handkerchief to conceal her tears. Philip rushed forward to break her fall, clasped her round the waist, kissed her with great gallantry, and amid many ejaculations of "Philip, dear!" and "Fanny, my beloved!" the couple passed several hours in delightful child's play. Fanny's irresistible toilet, made up as it was for the most part of paints, flowers, false hair, puff combs, hoops, and silk, played so powerfully upon the sensitive and innocent heart of Philip Redgill, that as he gazed upon her bewitchingly enameled features, as her fair head leaned lovingly and confidingly upon his manly breast, he determined to allow of little delay in marrying. And this resolution he whispered fondly into the not unwilling ear of his loved one, who blushed and sighed, and put her lace-worked handkerchief to her eyes, and appeared absorbed in deep emotion and crimson confusion. When consulted upon this matter that same evening in his library, Sir Andrew sat in his easy chair with much affected state, and played with his watch-chain and keys in a smiling, self-complacent manner. "I couldn't entertain any such project for the present, at least, not for 1 year, out of respect to Mr. Redgill, Senior's memory, by which time you will have fully wound up your affairs, and perhaps think more seriously upon the point, Philip." The coldness and calculation of old Sir Andrew simply had the effect of redoubling the ardor of the lovers, who sighed and condoled together on the proverbial cruelty of parents, with much melodramatic tenderness. Fanny did not confess it to her lover, but told Mamma, in confidence, that she thought 3 months would be sufficiently long to postpone the event. "For who knows what may happen, Mamma dear? I can't get such a chance as dear Philip every day. He is young, handsome, rich, and much courted. Who knows what might happen in 12 months? Philip, on the other hand, had his own motives for hastening the marriage, and sought every opportunity to visit and make love to his affianced. His eloquence and importunities were so impressive that he found the fair Fanny daily yielding to his arguments. And, knowing that she possessed a great vein of romance in her disposition, he played upon it so effectually that she finally consented to a clandestine marriage. "We can easily procure a license and get married a few miles out in the country without the old folks knowing anything about it, and then we can avow the act whenever we see that your cruel father will relent." In accordance with this plan, Philip procured a marriage license. Fanny met him, and after 2 hours' ride, they alighted at a small country town, and were privately married. No one knew them there, so that information could not be sent to town. Having spent the day very pleasantly together, the young couple returned in the evening, and when she arrived home, Miss Fanny informed her anxious and loving parents that she had been spending a very pleasant day with an old schoolmate. Philip called that same evening some time after Fanny's return home, and, hypocrite as he was, assumed all the manners of one who had casually dropped in for a customary evening chat. As usual, the old people retired into the inner drawing-room to allow the lovers to converse with freedom, and Sir Andrew came to the conclusion, in consideration of the unusually late hour at which Philip departed home, that the young couple were getting to like each other daily more and more, and would make a most excellent couple. Chapter 29. Charlie Warbeck in prison, true and false friends. While Philip Redgill was congratulating himself upon the gradual completion and success of all his villainous schemes, Charlie Warbeck was pining in prison, and totally deserted by all his fast and gallant friends of olden times. None of them would ever visit him. It was not respectable to be seen within the shadows of a jail, they said. Yet, if the truth were known, many of these fine sparks and gallants deserved to be in, rather than out of such an institution. More than one, had justice been cognizant of their little speculations, would have consigned them to worse apartments than that assigned to the brave-hearted, but foolish, Charlie Warbeck. Of all who knew him in his days of prosperity, gaiety, and unimpeachable character, there was not one who visited him, or made the slightest inquiry regarding his wants or necessities. He was consigned to oblivion in general estimation, and many of his former acquaintance stoutly denied that they had ever known or spoken to him in all their lives. Old Sir Richard called at the jail several times, and proffered all the aid in his power, but as Charles had already publicly acknowledged his guilt, and persisted in avowing it, legal assistance was considered to be of little avail. Dame Worthington was an almost daily visitor, and brought every kind of refreshment for the prisoner, and her tears ever flowed copiously as she embraced her dear son, as she endearingly called him. In truth, she frequently transgressed the rules of the prison, and remained much longer in her visits than the regulations allowed. But her sorrow was so sincere and apparent to all, that the turnkeys, individuals apparently constituted partly of iron, and partly of stone, looked on with much compassion, and always remarked as she departed, "If that there old lady was his own mother, she couldn't hang around that young man more tenderly and lovingly than she does." Mistress Haylark and daughter were also frequent visitors to the unhappy youth, and brought him many little trifles which might comfort and console him in his solitude. Miss Clara, in truth, was rather romantic in her behavior, for she often passed herself off to the prison authorities as his sister, and gained ingress thus very frequently. Charles had already explained to her the true nature of his offense, and the unsophisticated young lady firmly believed every word he uttered. She forgot all about her curls and curl papers, and was ever intent upon devising some scheme for his relief or comfort. In her increasing love for the young man, she even suggested various methods for his escape, and proposed the exchange of garments for that purpose. "Speak the word, Charles dear," she would say, "and I will stay in your stead, if there is any prospect of escape." She related to him all manner of devices for getting out of the dismal walls, and in her enthusiasm spoke of Claude Duval, and C. But Charlie listened to her interesting prattle with a smile, and kissed her tenderly for the affection which had prompted her to suggest so many and such romantic schemes. Clara was in love, but could not realize it. Charles was no better, yet smiled philosophically at the gradual, but positive growth of his attachment for the whimsical, romantic girl, with her luxuriant growth of curls, and mentally ejaculated, "A friend in need is a friend indeed. I can't help but like her. There's something about her which makes me love her. I do love her, but alas, I am not worthy of her." Several weeks passed away, and trials at the criminal court had not yet commenced. Old Sir Richard was sick from over-anxiety for his protégé, and his consultation visits with good old Dame Worthington were long and frequent. "If all the money I possess in the world could rescue the boy, I would freely give it," was his constant expression. And, as he sat on the sofa, beside good Dame Worthington, frequently without more light than that of the fire, he would press her hand affectionately, and the old lady would shed tears, yes, tears of bitterness. "My poor, poor Charles," the old lady would say. "The poor lad," was always the rejoinder. And thus they sat before the fire, hour after hour, communing with their own thoughts, and recalling again from the vista of the past sunny hours of youth, when love had warmed their hearts, and made them oblivious of consequences. Clara Haylark was Dame Worthington's chief comforter, for she was always consulting with the old lady regarding everything that might alleviate the sufferings of poor Charles, and that would add to his comfort. On several occasions Clara became so enthusiastic in regard to Charlie that, with her head all shaking with curls, and tears in her eyes, she openly avowed her love for the young man, and averred that she never would marry in her whole life without it was with him. This so much pleased the old lady that she caressed the young woman, and sat with Clara's head in her lap for more than an hour without uttering a word. As the criminal court trials approached, the visits of Sir Richard Warbeck, Dame Worthington and Miss Clara, unknown to her mother, became more frequent. Yet, despite all their endeavors, Charles persisted in refusing the aid of all legal talent, saying, "I have avowed my guilt. No one is responsible but myself, and I am willing to suffer the utmost penalty of the law." When his day of trial came on, there was a considerable muster of India House clerks and others in court, who, because he was unfortunate, were loud in their denunciation of the prisoner. Dame Worthington, Mistress Haylark and Clara were present also, and as Charlie, good-looking and gallant in bearing, stood in the dock and pleaded, "Guilty," to the charge preferred, Clara and the old dame gave vent to their tears copiously, and fainted. As the India House had been reimbursed by some unknown individual for the sum lost, the directors refused to prosecute, out of respect to old Sir Richard, who, it was well known, entertained great love for the accused. Charlie's penalty was not so great as many expected. Previous to his present fault, he had borne an irreproachable character, which tended much to lighten his sentence. He was condemned to 2 years' imprisonment with hard labor. Had it not been through much influence at court, and the blazing report of Wildfire Ned's glorious deeds, he would have suffered death. When returned to his cell, he was visited by a few friends, who congratulated him on his escape from a heavier penalty, and among the visitors was Philip Redgill, Esq. "I don't like to see you in jail, my boy," was Philip's first remark. "I'm supposed to know nothing of your transgression, but I must acknowledge you were a fool, a big fool, for confessing it. If you'd only kept your tongue still you would never have been found out. Goodbye, old fellow, I hope to see you out again one of these days. We must all pay for our experience, you know. I jeopardize my position in society by visiting you here, you know, but for old acquaintance' sake I thought I'd call." "Thank you," was Charlie's laconic reply, as Philip left the prison. "If the truth were only known we might exchange places, perhaps." Chapter 30. Philip progresses in love, his further scheming. While Charlie Warbeck is receiving the last visits of a very few friends, prior to his journey from London to the state prison, Mr. Philip is in daily consultation with his legal advisers and his father's executors. From a deep study of his accounts, those interested came to the conclusion that Mr. Redgill, deceased, was deeply involved in debt, and far beyond what any one might have expected. "Who'd have believed it?" said Mr. Sloman, the lawyer, in surprise, when confidentially informed. "Who'd have thought that such a man as he was should be so much involved? Well, I've had some experience in worldly matters, but I never could have believed him to be so much in debt, no, not if an angel from heaven had warned me." "What? Old Redgill to be insolvent? I can't believe it." Mr. Moss, who, as we know, was deeply interested, confessed that his worst fears had been realized. He always supposed that the old gentleman had been speculating too extensively. "He owes me £50,000, with interest, on various notes," said the Jew. "If his ships arrive safely, then I am safe, although there will be a very little margin left for Master Philip when the other debts are paid. Let us hope, Mr. Sloman, that the ships will arrive safe, or else, I don't mind confessing it to you, you know, Mr. Sloman, I am a ruined man." By some mysterious means old Sir Andrew had obtained an inkling of the true state of affairs, and when Philip paid his usual evening visit to his fair daughter Fanny, who was always elaborately dressed, and in waiting for her husband-lover, the old gentleman's manner materially changed. Nor did he smile so benignly and fatherly upon the young man as was his wont. "You must not give too much encouragement to young Redgill, Fanny," said Sir Andrew, with much solemnity, on one occasion, while walking the room in a perturbed state of mind. "For it might turn out that he isn't worth one penny." His daughter only smiled at her father's fears, and when her husband-lover came she received him in the drawing-room with more marked tokens of attachment than ever, with this difference, that the fond parent did not retire so far into the back drawing-room as of yore, but remained within earshot of all that transpired between the young people. Love laughs at locks, it is said. And so it happened with Philip and his young wife. They spoke in enigmas, and passed an hour or two each evening as happily as if the old folks were miles distant. In truth, Miss Fanny's evening walks became more frequent since her flying visit with Philip to the country, so that man and wife often met clandestinely, unknown to her parents, and their invariable success in eluding her natural guardians often caused much merriment and satisfaction between Fanny and Philip. On one occasion the footman informed Philip that Sir Andrew desired to see him in the library. The old gentleman's demeanour was so solemn and forbidding as he entered the apartment that Philip imagined his marriage had become known to him. "Mr. Redgill, is it true what I've heard, sir, that your very worthy parent died insolvent?" "Really, sir, I cannot believe it, but such are the rumours, and painful ones they are. Of course, you are aware, sir, that I allowed you to visit my daughter supposing you to be a member of society, who, in the event of marriage, an event, I know, happily yet far distant, and farthest from the thoughts of both, would be able to keep her in the style to which she has hitherto been used all her life. Of course, I could not think for one moment of allowing a penniless young man to make any serious advances towards one of mine." Philip scouted the idea that his father had died insolvent, and reassured Sir Andrew. "For," said he, "if my father really does stand insolvent, as his books might seem, and as rumours would have it, you are, of course, aware that his ships, when they arrive, would fully liquidate all claims of his creditors, and leave a very handsome surplus." In fact, you are aware, sir, that commercial communities think so highly of his transactions that even the insurance company, of which you are the president and greatest shareholder, have insured them for not less than £500,000. This latter argument was potent, and fully reassured the misgivings of old Sir Andrew, who ordered in wine, and explained many matters to the young man of which he was not before fully aware. Among the items of information thus gleaned in confidential conversation, after drinking much wine, it appeared that Sir Andrew's insurance company was not so responsible and respectable as its advertised capital would lead the reading public to believe, for, in truth, Sir Andrew confessed that should any serious loss fall upon it he could not honestly meet it, and that it might occasion a sudden collapse of the whole concern. Not that I should suffer so materially, added Sir Andrew, with a knowing wink, for I have all my private funds deposited with the South Sea Bank unknown to any one, and in another party's name, so that whatever might befall the insurance company I am all right and safe from personal danger. A few days subsequent to this conversation the executors returned a balance sheet, illustrative of the deceased Mr. Redgill's affairs. And it appeared, to the astonishment of every one, except those in the secret, that the late much-respected merchant really was insolvent, and owed his creditors much more than any would ever have anticipated. If the racehorse and Eclipse should arrive, all claims could be satisfactorily adjusted. Even if the ships were lost, and the insurance paid, this end might be accomplished. But without it the liabilities stood £200,000 beyond all assets, the chief debtor being the Jew Moss, for not less a sum than £50,000. When the worthy executors had arrived at these unpleasant conclusions, and revealed them confidentially and unofficially to the gay young Philip, he bit his nails in anger, drank off his brandy very copiously, cursed his father in a volley of bitter oaths, and in his fury burned the picture of the deceased, which hung over the mantel in the library. Yet, fully alive to the consequences which any such disclosure of affairs might have upon his own worldly prospect, he called a council of war, and beseeched the worthy executors to make no disclosures for the present. Not for my sake, gentlemen, he said, with much warmth and emphasis, but for the sake of the reputation of my worthy and much-loved father. I have no mother, nor kindred of any kind, except Sir Richard Warbeck, and therefore show my disinterestedness in its true colors. All I desire is to save my father's reputation in the community where he has lived and been respected for at least half a century. Therefore I beg, gentlemen, that you will say nothing of this for the present. When the ships arrive there will be enough, and more than enough, to liquidate every claim, and thus preserve the honor of my family. As to myself, I care not a jot if there is not a penny remaining over and above all his just and honest debts. All I desire to see is that every creditor may be satisfied, even if I, his only son, go forth on the world penniless and in rags. Such sentiments were much applauded by the executors, who thought it might be wise to say nothing until the arrival of these vessels. By some means, unknown to himself, Philip discovered that old Sir Andrew had become aware of the true state of things. But the young man argued so well that the insurance office director was comforted. "These reports you have heard, Sir Andrew, are untrue," said young Redgill, with much warmth and emphasis. "Circulated, doubtless, by some unknown enemy, who, knowing my ardent love for Fanny, has sought this method to poison your mind against me. Not that money could influence you in such an attachment as that which has always existed between myself and your daughter, for you are fully aware how ardent my love is, and how long it has existed, and I am positive you are too high-toned gentlemen to allow mere considerations of money to interpose between your daughter's happiness and mine, for if I knew this moment that Fanny was not possessed of one copper it could never alter my attachment. I love her for herself, and expect nothing with her, and I am certain you would never object to me on any financial consideration." Old Sir Andrew, in the largeness and generosity of his hypocritical heart, confessed that money, mere paltry lucre, had never entered his thoughts regarding the apportionment of his daughter and her settlement in life. "For, although I am rich, and beyond all want," said he, "I should not object to my daughter marrying the poorest youth in the country, provided he was honest, sober, industrious, of good family, and talented. No, indeed! Money is farthest from my thoughts, yet still, I should, of course, like to see Fanny fairly matched with her intended husband in that regard, and would rather see her marry a rich than a poor man, for money, after all, Mr. Redil is not to be despised. For the third time Philip had quieted Sir Andrew's misgivings, and he visited Fanny, his wife, as before, regularly every evening. But, after profound consideration, the young couple decided not to disclose their true relationship for a week or two. The Racehorse and Eclipse were frequently reported by fast-sailing ships to be on their way. All well. In truth, the captains of both vessels had written letters, stating how successfully their voyage had progressed, and what valuable cargoes they were bringing. The last letters were dated from Land's End, where they had put in on account of wild and dangerous weather, and the captain said that but a few days would elapse ere they would be reported by the telegraph station at Holyhead or Gravesend. The insurance office of which Sir Andrew was president was particularly pleased at this information. Sir Andrew was jubilant and in ecstasies. "I must manage to get rid of this young Philip," thought he. "I know the state of his father's affairs much better than he supposes. Ha! Ha! He can't blindfold me. I know a thing or two. Men on 'Change, as I am daily, hear many very curious things within a few hours. When the cargoes of these vessels are sold, and old Redgill's debts are paid, there will not be much to spare, particularly when he pays me the £15,000 he already owes me. He wants to marry my daughter, does he? What a smart youth he is, to be sure. As if I didn't see his nice little game. No, no, Mr. Philip, my daughter is destined for a richer man than you are. 'Tis true she likes him, and all that, but what's that to do with it? Lord! She'll soon get over all childishness when she learns the true state of things. I'm mighty glad, though, that those two vessels are perfectly safe. If they were lost, it would be a very serious thing for me, and no mistake. Never mind, I must take care not to take so heavy a risk next time, and then it will save an immense amount of anxiety. Heygo! Well, this is a curious world. I will dismiss Philip, and take Fanny to the continent out of the way. We'll have a gay time there, and she'll soon forget that young schemer Philip. I wish those vessels were arrived, the cargoes sold, and my money paid in, and then— Letter, sir, said the servant, handing in a note and retiring. Being in the daily receipt of letters and messages about ships and the like, old Sir Andrew paid little attention to the present one, but observing that ship news, immediate, was on the envelope, he opened it, and read, To Sir Andrew McTurk, President of the London Insurance Company. Sir, the captains and part of the crews of the China ships, Eclipse and Racehorse, have just landed at Holyhead, and report the total loss of their respective ships, which were attacked and stranded, robbed and burnt by the famous skeleton crew off the Land's End a week since. Nothing could withstand Deathwing and his band. The crew had scarcely time to get to the boats ere the ships struck the rocks, and were instantly smashed into pieces. Yours truly, Captain Brown, King's Cruiser, Seagull. If a 20-pound keg of gunpowder had exploded beneath Sir Andrew's easy chair, he could not have risen from his seat more suddenly than he did when he read that letter. He seemed to have jumped into the middle of the floor. And there he stood gazing at the round table, as if he saw thereon a nest of vipers. Gone! Said he, with an affrighted look, pulling his hair about, with eyes distended and open mouth. Gone! Lost! Both of them? Captured by those sea fiends? It can't be! He read the fatal letter again, word by word, and then sank into his seat with a spasmodic groan. Ruined! He muttered mournfully, and groaned again.